can we really rely upon tax policies? Can we rely on interventions by the ministries, by the government in order to help solve these disputes? Well, as through the article, the answers, swing both ways. They may be used. That's what the conclusion of the article is. But in all resolution of disputes, which one is aware of, there has to be an element of give and take. So as long as you're ready to undergo an element of give and take on what you think you're entitled to or what you think you're entitled to exclude yourself from, in that scenario, definitely yes, tax policy interventions can work. And one of the biggest examples are, of course, the highly debated Vodafone and Kane issues. And I'm sure most of you would be aware of the development that has come about yesterday in the Indian government proposing to undo the retrospectively. In this scenario, where does tax policy intervention leave us? Are important questions that can come apart and to be discussed. How to go ahead. um, to my mind, any and every tax policy intervention ultimately has to get translated into a law. And for that to happen, the policy intervention actually settles the areas that surround the dispute. It allows you to exit yourself from the legal scenario and look at the larger picture involved, and then probably approach the dispute in a different manner. So, while one says that arbitration, mediation, conciliation are all alternate means of solving disputes, is policy intervention one of those means? Yes, definitely so. It can be, but the policy intervention comes out from a single source, which is the government. It's not a two-way street at times. It's sought to be made into a two-way street, but one will still have to delve further to see whether in taxation it can actually achieve that aim. So, policy intervention would imply a method of solving a dispute from a third party perspective or from a perspective of excluding yourself from the law and seeing how ultimately to resolve a dispute and move ahead. It may not always have a good bearing for either the parties. Therefore, in the beginning, I said, they may be used and you may have to take a small hit in order for it to be working. And that's the little bit of give and take that policy intervention allows you to do. It gives you the breadth to do it. And ultimately, all these actions have to conform to Article 14. They have to be free from arbitrariness, they have to have a reasonable nexus, and they have to have a right objective in mind. Without that, yes, even these policy decisions can be challenged before the court as being unconstitutional. So that's the short gist of what I have written, argued, or sought to speak about. Um, I would leave the floor open for questions now. In case there's something else you'd like me to specifically talk about, please do let me know.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Anshuman, for this intriguing insight into how tax policies have subjective views that can be helpful and may be helpful for the taxpayers. Now, we have a few questions on the article itself.
Right.
Like, for example, first question that I would like to take up is that, in your opinion, like what single policy change may have like greatest transformative potential, like one single policy change. Like you have mentioned in your article yourself that there are plethora of tax issues right now pending before various courts,
Right.
and it takes a long time for Supreme Court to decide it. So what in your opinion would be a single policy change that can have the largest transformative potential in this scenario?
I think, in my view, the single biggest transformative policy change would be actually to altering the powers of the officials. At this stage, as I've also written in my article, the Income Tax Act only allows the authority to collect a tax and impose a tax and enforce a tax. There is no provision to settle a tax or settle a dispute or settle a matter per se. Yes, you have specialist procedures under which that can be undertaken, but every officer in the hierarchy of the setup has their role clearly cut out. Now, the greatest change in my view would be if the powers of the officers are altered in such a manner so as to be able to enforce dispute settlement before it reaches a stage of, the hierarchy of tribunal, high court, Supreme Court. Of course, there has to be modalities for it, and not every single officer will have that power, but surely within a jurisdiction, there has to be at least one officer empowered who can take that call, or at least start the process to bring it outside the litigable domain and get it into a dispute resolution mechanism. That I think would be, in my view, one of the biggest changes. Yes, I mean, and that would also involve the ability to accept a lesser amount, and that's not something which is in the act.
That's nice. And I think there are other questions on this as well, which I think Sana will take it up later on.
Sure.
But coming to your alternate dispute resolution that you just mentioned, alternate form of dispute resolution. So one thinks of arbitration immediately rather than just settling the matter, taking the tiny hit. And taking arbitration as a faster form, as a expedite form for dispute resolution. Now that in international scenario, we have this MLI, which has introduced arbitration for mutual agreement procedure between two different countries. India has not taken that step. India has taken a back step there, saying that no, it's a sovereign issue of India and not taken arbitration as a form of dispute resolution. Do you believe that arbitration, accepting to arbitration in such an international scenario or such a dispute, would actually undermine its sovereignty?
So I'll just understand it as two different parts of the question. One is, of course, the mutual agreement procedure and the dispute resolution mechanism under it. Well, you see, that's something that applies to DTAs and is between two tax entities. The whole dispute is who should tax it. So, in a sense, they are they are trying to see which country's law should apply over the other country's law. It's not adversarial yet because nothing has crystallized. The dispute before it is formed is sought to be sorted out. That's one element of it. The second point is, does arbitration allow, become a situation where we are undermining our sovereignty? Let's just take a step back from the entire, gamut of tax law and see what these two situations are in themselves. What is arbitration? Arbitration is a means of resolving a dispute basis a settled law. There still has to be a law which is being interpreted. The only difference is it's not judges who are interpreting the law, it's arbitrators who may have slightly less or different qualifications than judges. So ultimately, you are interpreting a law. The advantages is it's faster, it's slightly less formal. Of course, you can work your own timelines into that scenario, but the entire aspect and the entire quality of that is exactly the same as what you get in litigation or in the court system. Does it undermine India's sovereignty? I think the fear of that comes from a judge is perfectly capable of deciphering, dealing with tax laws, but will an arbitrator have the same understanding? Will an arbitrator be exactly qualified to deal with two countries' laws? Which countries is better? Which country to apply? Will he have that technical training? I think I don't think it undermines India's sovereignty, but I think it definitely undermines tax certainty in judgments and interpretation. I think unless and until there is a system by which you have arbitrators who are adept at tax disputes, well qualified, well experienced, and having them placed as arbitrators, I think it's going to be a difficult task to take this sort of chunk out of litigation and put it in arbitration. In my personal view, I think that's a fear which stands.
That's an interesting viewpoint. uh, okay. So the third question that I have is considering that CBDT and tax authorities in general, they have quite a revenue-centric mindset. We know that in practicality, some of them even have targets. And so, like your article is dealing with agricultural seeds issue, whether the income would be business income or agricultural income. And you go on to say that in the article it's mentioned that if CBDT intervenes clarifying this issue, there may be resolution of tax dispute. So, considering that how CBDT and other authorities we see are mostly revenue centric, then even clarification by CBDT would not ultimately be beneficial for taxpayers. They may be taking stands of tax authorities, for example, let's say. And then, since that clarification is not binding on taxpayers, it wouldn't help in dispute resolution. It will ultimately lead to more litigation. What's your view on this?
So my first view on this is it is pending in the court. It will get decided either way, either in favor of the taxpayer or in favor of the tax authority. If it gets answered in the favor of the taxpayer, that's the end of the story, right? He gets the relief that he wants, and then the government is bound to see how to work on it in the future. If the tax authority gets the relief, well, then even the taxpayer knows that there is a certain certainty to it, and I have to deal with this issue. The idea that I suggest that if a clarification is issued, well, there needn't be a need for a judgment in that favor. In that scenario, and the example that I've quoted very clearly says that there are foreign companies and there are Indian companies as well. The weight of the policy decision is vis-a-vis foreign companies taking out their money as royalties and the Indian companies retaining that money. That's the difference. The idea is, would the CBDT want to tax money which is going out of the country as exempt from tax simply because it comes under the broader definition of agricultural income? Or would the CBDT be willing to create a clarification which says that if the money is going out of the country, let it be taxed and then go out? When it comes to the Indian producers or the Indian companies that are dealing with the seeds as under the head of agriculture business income, well, food security law can be invoked. It can say that yes, to a certain extent, this income may be exempt from tax, not offered to tax, because it is ultimately going to achieve India's food security aim. So there is a nexus which is there, a reasonable understanding of Article 14, so as to not violate it. Um, the two things that come out of this is yes, the CBDT is in a position to tax the monies which are going out of the country, including some which stay in the country. So it is a situation which overall is beneficial. The math of are you taxing the entire 100 rupees or are you only able to tax 80 rupees is of course mathematical for the CBDT to do. But I believe there is an option which can be exercised reasonably. The question is, can they, will they? Well, I don't think I have the answer to that, but an option definitely stands.
That's right. Okay, that's nice to know. That's a
And
good.
also to just one other thing I remember to clarify on this, circulars instructions of the CBDT are binding on field officials. That's an old Supreme Court judgment. So no matter what clarification they bring out, it's in the right manner, it will certainly bind field officers to deal with assessments in that manner. So hierarchically, I think that would definitely work out. Whether it does or not, as I said, one can't say.
That's it. Uh, I would like to now call on Sana and
Yes.
request her to
I
ask.
think no one has the answer for that as of now. Uh,
Uh,
as mentioned in your article, that it was born out of supremely fast advent, sorry, of technology and businesses moving forward to a digital style of functioning. In your opinion, isn't the introduction of equalization levy through Finance Act a misuse of the sovereign power of the state? I mean, wouldn't such levy also fall within the ambit of such of tax treaties and be a perfect example for invoking MAP and arbitration for adjudication?
Well, two portions to this question. One, does it harm the sovereignty or does it misuse the sovereignty of the
Misuse.
country? Um, in my view, and this is also now vindicated by the current happenings in this particular arena, the equalization levy in a different form or manner has now been accepted by the G20 OECD group. They are in a position to bring out modalities on how to tax companies that work in the sphere where equalization levy applies. So, did India misuse its sovereignty? I don't think so. Uh, does the tax have a levy in law? Yes, definitely. The effect of that is such that all countries who are in the G20 are of the view that yes, this activity or this method of business or this business style of operation must be taxed. So therefore, to answer the first question, I don't think so. I think we're very well within the scope of our law to do something like this. On to the second portion, should it be under MAP and arbitration? I think it's early to say because had equalization levy been applicable in the manner that it still is, maybe one could have debated that further. But given the fact that G20 OECD is something that we are accepting on this point, in that scenario, what modalities are worked out, whether MAP and arbitration are offered as something which is mandatory, is yet to be seen. I think, in my view, it's a little premature to deal with the second aspect of this question right now. We'll have better clarity of it once I think the government gets into negotiations on the modalities of dealing with it and whether we ultimately do offer ourselves to MAP and arbitration under equalization levy by whatever new name it gets christened. I'm not. I can't say yet.
I understand. I think the sovereignty part also I asked because even though G20 countries like I think UK and France have enacted DSTs, but they were enacted after a lot of deliberations. I think in UK there were deliberations and debates held for 6 months, whereas in India none of that happened. It just popped up in the Finance Act out of nowhere, which is why.
I think we've had the experience of seeing how it's been going. We've there have been, and this is something which I know because I've seen it in other arenas, but the manner in which competition commission has been dealing with issues that arise in this space, I think there's been a very clear understanding of the economic business model that's happening. So I think the material was always there. It was always available. The studies, the research, even for you, the model that UK dealt with, I think it was always available to us. And yes, it was something that was done as quickly as possible, so as to not miss out on another year of them not being taxed. I don't see it as misusing, and definitely it hasn't been challenged in court in that manner either. So hopefully it's something that we're doing right.
Yes, also we were the first country to enact EL anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even from that point of view, lots of countries are looking at how we have dealt with it. So whether certain forms of the levy find itself in the ultimate paper by the G20, it remains to be seen, but it's a possibility.
That's right. That's right. Okay, I think I'll. Sorry. Okay, so I think I'll move on to the next question, which is how important, in your view, is the role of stakeholder consultations in resolving tax disputes? Do you believe that policy interventions coupled with stakeholder consultations would yield optimistic results and resolve tax disputes?
Okay. So the question is stakeholder views in resolving tax disputes. Uh, to my understanding, that's not a good idea. Stakeholder views in framing policy, it's still dealable. It's still a better subject to deal with. But to have stakeholder views in resolving disputes would, in my mind, open a Pandora's box of individualistic demands. Why I say this is because of my previous experience with the chambers of commerce, where I worked on their trade policy team. Uh, Before the foreign trade policy used to be launched every 5 years, we would have extensive stakeholder deliberations, extensive stakeholder discussions on what should the FTP cover, and they were mostly sector specific or industry specific. And at most times, we would find we'd get two sets of suggestions. One would be give us subsidy, give us a duty benefit, and the second would be please don't make WTO laws which are binding on us applicable to us. So the whole point of those stakeholder consultations would, in a sense, get defeated because the stakeholders are asking for exemption from WTO laws compliance, which is not possible. And the second is give subsidy, which also, to an extent, is not possible given the agreement on subsidies. So it's a tough call when you deal with the stakeholder consultations. If you would like to frame a policy on a particular subject, maybe yes, but to resolve tax disputes, I think it should remain to that point individualistic, or the government itself on its own should be in a position to solve this situation.
Right. Thank you for that. I think I'll move on to the next question then. That is, you've highlighted the importance of strictly construing tax statutes in the operating paragraphs of your article.
Right.
You believe that bestowing wide discretionary powers on the assessing officers is also instrumental in having regulations which tend to create ambiguity and in turn lead to disputes?
Um, see, okay. Uh, I think there are, again, I feel there are two elements to this question, and I don't think it's discretionary powers that allow, ambiguity to arise. There are two parts to any taxing statute. One is the levy of the tax, which is the operative portion, and the second is how to enforce that levy. Now, when we talk of discretionary powers, the understanding of how do I levy or how do I enforce that levy is what is at times confusing. That is where one feels, I mean, the purport of this question is, does that power lead to an ambiguity? My answer would be no, it is the levy in itself which would lead to an ambiguity, not the power of the officer to enforce that levy. So while one has to be very clear about the language and manner in which you get a provision that levies a tax, at the same time, you also have to be careful of the powers that you give the assessing officer or the other field formation officers when dealing with how to enforce that levy. But given the circumstances and the given time where we're advocating or adventing more policy intervention to settle disputes, I think it is the nature in which those discretionary powers or the direction in which those discretionary powers are given that matter. Are they given to you in a sense to fetter any and every means of enforcement of a tax? Well, then yes, they can be misused. But are these discretionary powers given to you to be able to settle issues, to settle disputes, to create resolutions? Well, then they have a different applicability. So it is the direction, in my view, which makes a difference. Otherwise, come to think of it, even if you don't have wide discretionary powers, in situations and scenarios like that, it's a very, very adversarial process that ensues because nobody's willing to give up space, nobody's willing to give up the little inch of ground that they've got. So, wide discretionary powers are, in a sense, better than absolutely restrictive, powers which are just going in with the flow of the statute. The importance is which direction do you give the discretion in, and that's what determines whether it's going to be successful or not successful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anshuman. I think let me see if we have more questions from the public.
Sure.
Ritesh? Hi.
Yeah. Hi. I had just one question, like when we were discussing the recent update, yesterday's update
Sure.
on the removing on the amendment bill of taxation of removing the retrospectivity of the 2012 amendment. Now, if we see the amendment itself, it's quite monumental step by the Indian government, and it relates to 2014 speech of Mr. Jaitley as well, the then finance minister. But do you think that taxpayers now, especially Kane, for example, they have got they have won the arbitration award in their favor, and they have also received interest in that award. Would they now be foregoing that interest as per the policy to uh, which they have been awarded in the arbitration award to take a benefit of this amendment? And secondly, is this amendment conditional upon leaving your damages, upon completely foregoing your damages and interest rights? Would that be constitutional as well? Because
Right.
it's not a policy in itself, it's an amendment under the law.
Correct. Correct. So you're right about that. The biggest question lies in whether they will take up the offer of refund of tax, because let us say that tax is X amount and what they've got in their award is X plus penalty plus interest plus damages and X, a whole bunch of things. So yes, definitely they have been awarded much more. Now the question remains whether they are ready to accept just the refund of the tax and put a quietus to this issue, or would they be willing to go ahead and enforce their actual amount. The premise of this amendment, in my view, very clearly says that we will refund the tax to you as long as you don't enforce any action with respect to the tax anyway. So they've got an award in their favor, which is tax plus damages plus interest. If you don't enforce it, we'll give you back the tax. And it's as simple as that. The undertaking has to be also provided that we will not enforce it, we will not go beyond. So really, it's a question of, I think, diplomatic efforts now, and whether the government of India and Kane are able to sit together and agree to this as a one-time measure to just settle everything and go, because everybody has incurred massive legal fees in this as well. Legal costs are there, arbitration costs are there, and costs of litigating in courts also stand. So the ultimate cost factor analysis and benefit would be done, I think, by both parties to see whether taking the tax back is the better thing to do or not. Is also a second way of looking at it.
That's it. Okay, and I think we have a question as well.
Right.
So it says, doesn't the equalization levy circumvent the impact of Section 90, subclause 2 of Income Tax Act, as it is not governed by the Income Tax Act at all, and was rather introduced in a hurried manner without deliberation from the stakeholders under the purview of Finance Act 2016 and 20? And do you think that Indian Parliament has the power to act in derogation of the tax treaties or to circumvent the provisions of tax treaties through unilateral domestic legislation?
Right. I'll take the second portion of the question first. Um, and this is evident in my example on anti dumping as well in the article. There is international law and there is domestic law. Now, domestic law very clearly is supposed to embody international law, but every country's domestic law is still supreme as compared to international law. There can be variations, there have been variations, and as long as the domestic law is not, in my opinion, violative of the constitution and the basic understanding of what is fundamental in nature and what are the protections allowed to you, variance with international law would not be a constitutional folly. It would not amount to a violation that is, actionable, unless and until it actually leads to some sort of an erosion or some sort of harm to a party. In that case, also, it's not the national court which will decide. It's of course the international court, and which court, which setup, who is the claimant matters a lot. But in my understanding, domestic law still reigns supreme, and that is the law of the land, and that has to be judged on the constitution of the country where the law is. So I don't think that this would per se lead to an issue, but it can be debated in the international court between two countries whether it did lead to any harm arising out of it. That is one. As far the first part of the question arises, right. I would take some time to answer this. I could put this on email and answer it. I am not entirely aware of this at this stage, so it wouldn't be right for me to answer without knowing it. But Ms. Dhwani, I will definitely look into it and I will answer this to you on email, if that is all right.
Not
Great.
a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Right.
Uh,
Is there anything else I could answer or help with?
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions right now. I would really like to request the attendees, if they have anything, please mention it in the chat box, or else we can just end the session right now. And thank you, Mr. Sani, for this intriguing session and insightful session in the policy and how it helps in resolving the tax disputes.
Thank you very much for having me here. I think it's a lovely initiative that the CCIT has started, and with what I've seen initially of the tax terminal, I hope it does, give a lot of information to budding tax practitioners as to how to navigate this very complicated sort of a maze which tax law is. So thank you for that, and you guys
Thank
have
you,
done
sir.
a great
And
job.
we look forward to further contributions from your side and have further sessions like these with you.
I have a part two almost ready for this.
Perfect. Perfect. Then.
Okay.
Thank
That'd be
you.
very.
Great.
Thank you for
Thanks.
your time, Mr. Sani.
Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you
giving
for
your
your
time on
time.
a Friday evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.